நம்முடைய ஐநாவுடைய முன்னாள் ஒருங்கிணைப்பாளர், இலங்கை விவகாரத்தில் நீண்ட அனுபவம் கொண்டவர், அமைதி உடன்படிக்கை இருந்த காலத்திலே பிரதமர் ரணில் விக்ரமசிங்கவுடைய ஆலோசகராகவும் இந்த விவகாரத்தில் செயல்பட்ட திரு டேவிட் வேலி அவர்கள் நம்முடைய இணைகிறார். Thank you very much, Mr. David, for agreeing to talk to us. Now that the resolution on Sri Lanka is passed, are you happy about the resolution?
Very happy indeed. For me, this is the next step in a very long process. We are, after all, 6.5 years after the end of the war, after the tragic events of the closing phase of that war. And we have now together turned a page and opened a whole new chapter, which will, I hope, bring peace, prosperity, development to all parts of Sri Lanka, but especially to the north and east. But the next stage in that path is all communities coming to terms with the reality, the truth about that terrible past, and what Sri Lankans did to each other, what all communities did to other communities. But yes, it's a huge day. It is, I think, the first time that everybody, including the Sri Lankan government, has acknowledged the terrible things that happened, have accepted that the UN now has a record, a report, that details and analyzes those terrible things, and that at the same time, based on that acknowledgement of terrible events, lays the basis, an agreement on the next steps, a resolution which is a consensus between Sri Lanka, its former critics, and supporters of the Tamil community within Sri Lanka and across the globe. It is, in that sense, historic, and I certainly welcome it. And one little regret, that it did take 6.5 years to get here, but that's a little bit how the workings of the Human Rights Council and perhaps the United Nations are. Things take time, but if there is commitment, the courage of the victims and witnesses to tell their stories, to bring their truth to light, if there is willingness on the part of the international community to listen, the Human Rights Council to receive a very difficult report and to take action with the agreement of the government of Sri Lanka, this is impressive.
Despite its very successful adoption and unanimity on this matter, there are two kinds of criticism. Some say it's strong and intrusive. The others say it's watered down and has deviated from the recommendations of the High Commissioner. How do you look at these allegations, criticisms?
Well, actually today I was looking through the recommendations of the OISL report itself. That's where the weighty recommendations came. And I was actually quite surprised to see that well over 80% of those recommendations are reflected either in the resolution or in the very clear, strong commitments made by the government of Sri Lanka through its foreign minister in the council chamber, which is as good as being in the resolution, because those are strong commitments made to the people of Sri Lanka, made to all communities, and made to the members of the council right here. There are some issues that are not there. I think some by accident, few by design. And strangely, one of those that's not there is all the recommendations relating to the work of the United Nations and to other countries. This obviously was focusing on Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan government and its commitments, firstly. So there's a lot in the resolution, a lot on which we can build. Now, I just hope that those people who are disappointed, those people who are criticizing, rapidly set that aside, recognize that we have something we can build on together. Because if we only criticize, then we will actually be, in my view, failing the communities and the victims. What we now need for implementation, for full implementation, is for everybody to pull together behind this resolution. That is the best way to ensure it. Explain it fairly to the Sri Lankan people, to the Tamil community as the principal victims, to the Sinhalese community, who will have a lot of difficulty in coming to terms with some of these truths. But that needs to happen. Obviously, it will help when there is a full Tamil and a full Sinhalese version of the full report. I am told that that is now well underway, and I'm sure it will be a full and accurate translation. When that information is there need to be public information campaigns to allow people to come to terms with the reality that terrible things were done by each community to the other, and then to build from there. Yeah.
Another criticism is this resolution is not very vocal on the demilitarization, like the previous resolutions passed on the same matter.
I think, again, you have to look at what is in the resolution, and what is in the resolution is extraordinary acknowledgement that the Sri Lankan armed forces did terrible things. It makes it very clear that that was the result of command given by senior people, and that the perpetrators were certainly in the armed forces, but they did not represent all the armed forces, and that the terrible things that happened in Sri Lanka have not only done a disservice to those military that were decent in Sri Lanka, but frankly also to military across the world.
But it's about the army-civilian ratio that's appalling even now.
Again, I more than understand the sentiments that call for the immediate demilitarization of the North and East. To win the war, the government built an army of 300,000 military plus. Most of them were recruited from poorer villages in the southern parts of the island. Demobilizing them has to be done safely. Removing them from the north will require their reinstallation elsewhere in the interim. And I think what now needs to happen is some very serious work to redeploy those people. First of all, to ensure that they no longer interfere in civilian life, that they are cantoned in the north. Secondly, that they, as soon as possible, that they be redeployed geographically. And thirdly, that programs be put in place to help them to reintegrate civilian life. Because Sri Lanka cannot afford, and certainly does not need, a military of 300,000 strong.
That's true. And what do you think are the challenges that lay ahead as far as the implementation of the resolution in entirety?
Well, very clearly, there now needs to be joint work on the design of the mechanisms that are going to deliver the implementation. Mechanisms for justice, mechanisms for truth-telling, mechanisms for reparations, and mechanisms, maybe the most important and the most difficult, for reconciliation. All of that is required. And what I would urge everybody, including the critics of the resolution, to do is to find ways of helping the victims' community to be at the center of that process. Not to criticize it, but to join in showing that the design is sound, that these mechanisms can deliver the next stage. And that's where we're at. And it's there will also have to be some hard talks, some negotiations between the international community, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the core group of sponsors of the resolution, and the government of Sri Lanka, to ensure that there are sound mechanisms or sound processes. That the Sri Lankan government embarks on the difficult course of security sector reform, of legislative reform that will be required to implement, and that it seeks, turns and accepts international involvement, participation and support wherever needed in the process.
Thank you very much, Mr. Whaley, for agreeing to talk to us. ஜெனீவாவிலிருந்து ஒளிப்பதிவாளர் லூகாஸுடன் ஹரிஹரன்.